thank you once again for joining us on one of our informative but also exciting program. What is it that we are talking about today? Yes, let's go political. But what you need to do, remember to subscribe to this channel so that every time we go live on air, you'll never miss this informative and exciting programs. My name is Robert Tafumane. What is it that we are talking about? We are talking about someone who has been incarcerated for a number of months, but later on, after an appeal against sentence and conviction, the High Court said you are now a free man. Who is it that I'm talking about? This is Jacob Ngaruvhume. The man does not need an introduction. Let's get to find out what happened. Can I start to beg from college? Kwanga kuri sei?
Kukoreji ndoko tanga tiri sure it's not a very nice place to be.
Yes,
obviously.
yes. Yeah.
And more so when you know and understand that you are innocent.
Yes.
That you committed no crime. And everyone was clear about that position, including even the magistrate Feresi Chakanyuka, who convicted me to 4 years for inciting public violence, which I never did. So yeah, it was not the best of places to be, but anyway, I'm glad I'm out and I'm back.
Yeah, let's go back a bit on the day that you were convicted. I understand you were now coming from home and you were in the dock and the magistrate says guilty, and obviously the door that you used to come in it became different. How did you feel? What went through your mind when you were convicted on that day?
So what happened to me on that day is I was pronounced guilty by Chakanyuka, and then I had the privilege and the honor actually to go back home because I was still on bail, and then only to come back for the next day for sentencing. And I went back home. By the time she pronounced the verdict, I could tell from her anger and bitterness against me that she's going to convict me, or at least that she has an instruction to convict me. I could tell that even when the evidence was presented, she was not listening, she was not paying attention, she was just ready to finish her job, to deliver my head to her bosses. And in this case it was the regime, the ZANU-PF government. They were paying for my head and for my blood, and she was really ready to just do that. And so she didn't listen to any of the evidence, so I'd already prepared myself for the worst. So I was just ready to know that the worst is coming.
Yes, but in terms of the worst, were you prepared for 4 years? The worst, was it 1 month community service or what?
I think the real shocker that she gave me on that day was the 4 years. Whilst I could tell that she was heading for conviction, whilst I could see her anger and resentment and her eagerness to really punish me, I never thought it was going to be 4 months for inciting public violence. I didn't commit the crime. The state could not prove, because one of the basic tenets of the criminal justice system is that the burden of proof lies on the state to prove that I am guilty. But now, and one of what they wanted to do was they wanted to link me to that Twitter account, which they were alleging that I had posted a poster. I had designed a poster and just posted it on there. And then besides them not being able to link me to that account, they kept changing even the Twitter accounts, which they alleged that I had posted. They were saying I was charged on my charge sheet. It was at J. Ngaruvhume. Then on the conviction and the sentencing, they were using at Ngaruvhume. So they convicted me under at Ngaruvhume, and then they charged me under at J. Ngaruvhume, which 2 Twitter accounts I never owned, and one of them actually never existed. The one they actually convicted me with, there's no such Twitter account called Ngaruvhume. But because they were so desperate and because she was so determined to cage me and put me behind bars, they didn't even care. So they were just they knew they didn't need evidence to convict me, and then they went ahead.
But so why the eagerness to convict you as a Zimbabwe?
It was before elections. I think one of the things is they didn't want to have the election whilst I was outside. I could read that. They wanted me inside for the election. And secondly, because I called for the anti-corruption demonstrations of 2020, I think for them it was also payback time to say, we can punish you, whether you called for violence, whether you incited anybody, whether whatever you did, we don't give a damn, we don't care, we just punish you for speaking out against corruption. I think that was the main challenge they had with me, that how dare I speak out against corruption, and not only speak out but consistently do so. Then called for the peaceful anti-corruption demonstrations, which gained national momentum by that time. And to them, I think it was a matter of then saying, let's punish him so that no one else can come up and call for anti-corruption demonstrations ever.
So, begging quote again, we're talking about two now X accounts, but reasonably, why would they read or present two accounts at J. Ngaruvhume and Ngaruvhume, and then as learned as they are, and agree that the accounts belonged to you?
And you know, they were asked by my legal team, Professor Lavmo Maduku and Moses Ngomo, you know, there is a procedure, in fact, that law officers and government agents can take if they want to verify an X account. I mean, I went to prison when it was still Twitter, so I'm still to learn that is now called X. So if you want to verify whose X account it is, there's a very simple procedure which the law enforcement agents knew, because what happened is they were asked by Professor Maduku in cross-examination. Then they narrated it, and they were asked, did you follow that procedure to check whose account it was? Then they said, never, we never did that. But still the magistrate did not even care about all that. She knew that what she wanted was a conviction and a stiff penalty, no matter the evidence presented. So to them it doesn't matter. And there's no punishment for abrogation. Remember, if they commit any crime, if they do things like what they did to me, they still know that they can get away with it. They don't uphold to the tenets of the rule of law. You know, so they didn't care. Couldn't even look at the evidence so carefully, which was very embarrassing when the matter then went for appeal at the High Court. It was so embarrassing because now how the prosecutor at the High Court was asked, how then could you charge somebody under a different X account and convict them on another X account, which you never showed them throughout the process, even on the warned and cautioned statement? Is that not a fatal error? They considered, but they even knew it was a fatal error at the magistrate's court, but they didn't care.
So let's talk about the demonstration that probably they would also say you called for. In the manner that you did, in your own opinion now, probably, and also from others out there, or the court of public opinion, do you think calling for demonstration against corruption is a criminal offense?
It is not. Absolutely, it is not. But in the eyes of a dictatorship, and in the eyes of a regime that feels threatened by anything that citizens do, it is a crime. It is an offense. And because they've captured the judiciary system, you know, especially at the low level, at the entry level, at the magistrates level, I mean, it has become a kangaroo court. People are convicted who committed no crime. They are convicted at the magistrates court. The evidence is not listened to. The basic tenets of law are not observed at the magistrates court. It's like a kangaroo court. It's a chief's court in the village where we grew up, where anyone can just rise up, say anything, judgment is passed. So it's more or less what you have at the magistrate's court. So to call for a peaceful demonstration, our constitution provides for people to call for demonstrations, provides for people to express their frustration with government. These are the checks and balance that any government would need. But to our regime, it is a crime to call for anti-corruption demonstrations of 2020 like I did. And they punished me for that.
So, in your own opinion, why would they think, calling out for a demonstration against corruption is a crime?
To them, this regime is corrupt.
Okay.
They live off corruption. And corruption has become so endemic in their system and is part of who they are. And when Zimbabweans and those citizens, those of us who seek to expose that corruption and speak out so strongly against it, when we do so, they feel so much threatened. They feel so much intimidated, and they are so much shaken to the core that they want to protect their space and their turf. And remember, they have an anti-corruption commission.
Yes.
I've been to the anti-corruption commission countless times. I've asked their budgets. They are funded to the tune of millions of dollars. And I also checked the feedback to say how much have they recovered. A year they could be funded to the tunes of millions of dollars US, and then they recover not much. Not at all. So the anti-corruption commission is actually a liability to the Zimbabwean society and to our budgeting. In fact, if anything, they are getting a lot of money but getting very little in return. So that is a complete failure. But they use it as a window dressing organization and operation. And now when the real issues are asked, I went at length at the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission to interrogate them about the 2020-2021 Auditor General's report, which showed millions of dollars unaccounted for in government departments, in various government departments. And then I took them to task. What did you do about this as the Anti-Corruption Commission? What did you do about all those allegations of corruption? The 15 billion that Mugabe talked about clearly to the nation. I asked them about all that, and they do nothing. And that's what this regime wants. People who know about issues and things and do nothing about them. If you come up and are speaking about it and saying, let's do something, they put you behind bars.
So from the head of state, every time and then, especially probably at public forums, you speak about the fight against corruption. Is it a political statement? Is it a party statement? Is it his statement? Where is that statement coming from? Is there political will at the end in this country to fight corruption?
My brother Robert, it's the same as the way he speaks so much about violence and his commitment to non-violence, when in fact we know that at the end of the day he goes ahead to beat up innocent citizens in Mabvuku Tafara, so I heard killing them. His party victimizes the elderly in Motoko. They beat them up and it's never investigated. They threaten to kill anybody who is in opposition and not with ZANU-PF. They do so openly, but at the same time he's also still speaking against violence. So those are mostly political statements that mean nothing to them, that mean nothing. Remember, they talk of a judiciary that is so impartial, so that is so fair, that is so sincere, but we know we have been victims of that same judiciary that they are talking about, that it observes the rule of law. We know they've completely captured it. So whilst they may speak and say certain things and statements, but they are far away from implementing it or taking those issues seriously. Those are just but mere political statements which mean nothing.
So where are we going as a country in the terms of fighting corruption? Because if they are just mere statements, where are we going as a country?
As the young people say these days, we are going where we are coming from. I think about that a lot. I reflect about that. At one time, they even tried to say in 2020 back then, they were saying, we are sponsored by the West. because we've
Yes,
called for anti-corruption.
Yeah.
I mean, we've advocated for the anti-corruption protests, and so we are supported by Americans. And I was reflecting. I took a lot of time to reflect, to say, so if I speak out against corruption, that is because I've been asked to do so by the West, by America, Britain, and what have you. So it means to them, they don't actually believe it is possible for an African, for a Zimbabwean for that matter, to sit down and say, I do not want corruption. Not just what they say, that, they say no to corruption, meanwhile Wicknell Chivayo is frauding, was it Zesa or what, is frauding them, and then he doesn't supply, he takes them to court, gets further money, but at the same time they are saying no to corruption. They've drained and taken life out of parastatals and companies linked to the government. They've drained them. So there's no commitment to these issues. So when you reflect and think about it, you then say, okay, until such a time that we as citizens, as Zimbabweans, we have no other heritage, my brother.
Yeah.
We have no other heritage except this beautiful country. So until such a time that we stand up and show our commitment in the practicality, to say, yes, I'm a Zimbabwean. If it means that I will rot in Chikurubi because I have stood up to speak justice and truth to power, to speak out against corruption, so be it. I'm going to rot in Chikurubi. If it means I'll be killed in Mavuku for what I believe, multi-party plurality in our politics, in our democracy, the ethos and tenets of our democracy, if I believe that I can stand out and stand up and be killed for that, so be it. There needs to come a time when Zimbabweans show that commitment practically, and we confront the regime, and we confront the situation. Then when such a time comes, then Zimbabwe will be free.
Let's go back to the court a bit. You said when you were convicted, obviously you went home. The following morning you went back to the court for sentencing, and according to you, you had psyched yourself, for whatever the kind of sentence that was coming, despite that it ended up being 4 years. What were you're a family man, Mr. Ngaruvhume. What were your words when you're leaving the house to your wife and the kids?
I told them, and I think for the first time my children, because they're a little bit, they are mid-teenagers, it was also time for me to tell them for the first time that the career that I've chosen, the work that I do other than my professional work, because I have my own professional work which they know about, but also the call and the profession I've chosen to be a political leader or a politician or an activist in this country, what does it entail? What are the risks? So I sat down with them and told them that, they will take me away. And I may come back or I may not even come back. I told them that. I had that very difficult conversation with them that, maybe I may come back, but I may come back sick and I may not make it. Or if there is sufficient grace, I'll come back strong and be able to join you when I'm not even sure. It's a conversation I had to have with the children. We excluded the little one who is only about 12 years. But the other two, we had to have that conversation. It was not easy, very difficult, but they had to accept it. I told them that it was a choice. I was not coerced into it, but this is what I believe I need to do for my country. So we had that conversation. They didn't take it lightly. My wife, it was so damaging. She has always known it and she always supports me. But to then imagine that I'm going away and I won't be with her for a long time, it was very painful. But it has to be done. I mean, for me, eventually it was 4 years. They said 4 years. But, others have been there for 10 years, for more years than I have. So I know that I also had to take up my cross and run with it and drink my cup as well. And I had to do that with humility and fortitude, which I tried to.
Children being children, obviously, they asked you one or two questions. What were their questions then?
You see, my son asked me, why do they do that to you, Dad? I mean, that's one of the things that I remember so strong. He said to me, why do they do that to you? Because you're a good man. I mean, you've committed no crime. You are such a good and wonderful man. Why do they do that to you? I said, my son, you will understand when you even grow a little older than you are now. So yeah, it's one of the things they asked me.
So let's talk about now your stay in prison. From there, you were taken to Harare Central or to Chikurubi?
I was taken to Harare Central Prison. And obviously Chikurubi is now home to my friend Job, and they probably didn't want us to be together for that season. So I went to Harare Central Prison. That became my home for the next 8 months.
Yeah. What was the kind of reception that you got from the officers?
I was welcomed to the prison by the officer in charge. He tried to assure me that they will handle me like any other prisoner, which did not turn out to be so, because initially I remember I was when my visitors were coming, then I was seeing them at the condemned section of the visitors, where you see, so those people who are waiting hanging, who have been sentenced to death, they use their own facilities, and they've got their own places where they see their visitors. And this is where I was asked to see my visitors, where you don't even see the visitor, you only see their hands and hear them talk. Yeah, so that's where I was initially asked to meet my visitors, until I started fighting. And of course, I got quite a hero's welcome from the prisoners themselves. They took me as a hero, and they felt I'm doing a great job fighting for them. So I got really a heartening welcome, and got quite a lot of favors. They tried to create bigger space for me. You know, in the prison you get like 30 centimeter beds, 30 to 40 centimeters. That's where you are sleeping. So you sleep on the floor on a space of about 30 centimeters to 40 centimeters. And so because they know me, I'm a political leader, they would try even to squeeze their own space so that they create a slightly bigger space for me of about 50 centimeters to 60 centimeters, so that at least I can try to be as comfortable as they can help themselves. So yeah, that was actually a positive aspect, that they welcomed me, the prisoners, with a lot of joy and jubilation. And of course the officers as well, you know, I had quite a number who were very hostile, but at the same time there were also a few really good guys who did their work professionally. And then of course there were also those who were trying to intimidate me and take me for a ride, which of course I resisted with equal force. Yeah, but yeah, it was quite a mixed experience, the good and the bad, but at the end we managed to pull through the time that we served there.
So from those that were giving you the negative reception, did you even try to have a conversation? You know, you are an officer, you are a civil servant, why are you treating me like this?
One of them actually, you know, it was a young man, very bizarre. He came to me and said, do you know that we can kill you here? We've killed Lenmo Jongwe and what have you. He was making reference to nasty things. I knew probably that he was not telling the truth, because, you know, Lenmo Jongwe was never at Harare Central Prison. He was at Harare Remand, not Harare Central Prison. So I knew obviously that at his age, I mean, he must have been born way after 2000. He must have been born around 2005. So, but I mean, but it surprised me that, I mean, what manner of... I almost responded so harshly, but then I knew I had to hold back myself. And then there was a more senior officer who then stepped in. He was even trying to use a pen to attack me with a pen, and I mean, I really controlled myself. Then his senior then came through and prevented him. But I have since spoken to most of them. I would tell them that, you know, what we are fighting is this system, and you only work for the state and for the government, but in terms of crafting and building the system, you are not responsible for it. So allow us as leaders in this country, as opposition leaders, to do our job, and that job will benefit you. That work, if we are successful, it will free you also and enable you to take you to a position and situation where you can look after each family well, in a more dignified way and manner. So yeah, I would try to speak to some of them. Most of them in fact would then see sense in what I would tell them. But of course there were a few who still feel that they are the last line of defense of the regime, and they have to please the regime at whatever cost. Such people are always there.
So in terms of your visitors, you spoke about the place that you could see them, and you fought for it. Was it changed so that you can go to the section? Yeah,
it was changed. So eventually what they did, it was 3 months I was on the condemned section where I could not see the visitors. So then for the last 5 months I was now seeing them on the regular visitor section, where you actually got to see the person. You know, there of course there's a space in between bars and so on, but at least you see their face, you see if they are healthy, and then they also got to see you, because you know, when you get in there, it's a lot of worry. Is he doing hard labor? Is he healthy? How does he look? So all this time they could not see me, so they could only hear my voice. But then thereafter they could then start seeing me, and we could interact even more, and it was a lot better even for me also to be able to see my wife, members of the party, members of the family, and many other you know, good Zimbabweans who were coming to see me when I was in prison.
Still on the visitor, you know, once one is convicted and you start serving, you know, these are the time that you make new friends, and also to a certain extent lose some of the friends. By making new friends, your new home was central. Obviously the prisoners became your friends and family, and those that you were working with outside, you know, some of them might have remained with you, some of them left. What kind of support did you get from those that were outside, you know, when you were incarcerated?
Yeah, I got overwhelming support, Robert. That's the truth, and I am so grateful. Firstly, I got overwhelming support from my family, my wife, members of the extended family, and members of the big Ngaruvhume family. They were all in support. My relatives, you know, and close party members, those who have worked for me even in my professional work, those who have worked together with me in the party, there was overwhelming support. There was overwhelming support. Yes, inevitably you can lose one or two, but it's so insignificant compared to the kind of support that I received. You know, they could bring me food every day. I got a visitor every day. Every one of the 8 months that I was at Harare Central Prison, I got a visitor every day. And the only few days that I would say please don't come is because either I would be doing other things, like maybe focusing on prayer, or I would have other commitments at prison which I would not want to be disturbed on. You know, but I got a visitor virtually every day. My wife, she came to prison almost all the days that she was in this country, unless when she would go outside the country on business, then come back. Otherwise she would come to prison daily. And many other of my colleagues, friends and relatives and members and associates, they came. So I got overwhelming support, which I appreciate.
Wonderful. Did they even complain from the way that they were treated? Because once you get there, what?
They would wait, you know, they would complain of waiting and waiting. And at one time I had a very unfortunate incident. You know, one young little lady officer, so she then starts to shout at me in the presence of my wife, my national organizer from the party, and 2 or 3 other relatives, that because they would allow 4 at a time. So when the 4 walked in and then I'm speaking to them, then she starts to shout at me, and then I really lost it, and I hit back at her so hard. You know, I mean, I told her, no, you can't do that, my little lady. You know, that's not the way to treat prisoners. So, I mean, you would face such embarrassing moments whereby they try to humiliate you in front of your family. I mean, humiliation when you are in prison is part of a daily package. One way or another, they will be humiliating you. But it's okay as long as you are there, you are by yourself, and they are doing that. You don't even care because you get used to it. But when they try to do it in front of your family, more so your wife, you don't take it so nicely. And I didn't, and I really told them that no, this, I even made a complaint even to the officer in charge, to security and to everybody, that no, if you are going to treat me like this, then you will lose it, because I mean I will really go up the wall. So we got to an understanding of one another. Things like that did not happen any frequent after that.
So can we say these, officers, some of those that treated you so badly, is it under instruction? Is it from themselves? Because probably they might be aligned to a certain political party or system. Is it as an individual? Where does that treatment come from? What motivates them to act like that?
You see, so I think one of the things I realized when I was at prison is that, they are very good officers, like I've said.
Yes.
They are very good ones.
Yeah.
They are also very bad officers. But what I think overall needs attention is the whole prison officer training program.
Okay.
That manual, I think, falls far short in terms of defining what a correctional officer needs to be. They are trained more like jailers and prison guards, not as correctional officers. The prison system of the world right now is moving towards correctional aspects, where they are trying to reintegrate the prisoner into society. But at our own prisons, it's not like that. That training falls far short of that criteria, and so the training fails them. That's one of the first things. And then, of course, secondly, it can be a combination of also all the factors you have raised, whereby some officers would feel that I mean, if you are from the opposition, then damn you. If I do anything, rather I would be promoted over your sorrows than anything. So let me just do what I can to gain favor. They can do that. And then, of course, one of the things I also realized is that there's no understanding of what a prison officer needs to be doing. The relationship between a prison officer and a prisoner in Zimbabwe is that of a master and slave. Okay. Even the sitting position, when you are speaking to an officer, you're not allowed to be standing. You take up a position which they call foreign. Foreign, and then foreign is virtually you just like, you squash down, you virtually sit down as he is standing up and instructing you, which is so humiliating and embarrassing. And they allow that. It's like official prison way of dealing with prisoners, which then gives them a lot of superiority, and they feel that they're actually gods over the prisoners, which is very unfortunate. And for your own information, the word foreign in prisons, it was taken from an Afrikaans fall in, which means fall in as in the military expression. When you are asked to line up, you are asked to fall in. And then instead of saying fall in, they say foreign. And then they call it foreign. And then it's so much abuse. So that position on its own gives the officer so much power and superiority, whilst it gives the prisoner the position of a slave. And that's, unfortunately, this is the way it is in our prisons.
So, and still on the correctional aspects, when one is convicted, when you're in prison, there are a lot of activities that happens there, even in terms of education, in terms of how they are trained to do some projects, so that when they reintegrate into the society, some of them might even take up from what they've learned when they were within. What did you do?
Nothing, because there's nothing. Nothing, because there's nothing. I mean, there are no projects they teach anybody. There is a school which allows prisoners to take up from grade 1 to Form 6 classes. And I was so impressed actually by that program, because I saw elderly men doing grade 1, 2 and 3 at Harare Central Prison. That was a huge inspiration to me. But other than that, there's nothing further. And it's only a minute proportion of the prisoners that's actually a part of the education at prison. So no, there's very little reintegration programs. You know, they've got a rehabilitation department, but I think their main role is just to call your relatives and tell them what you are missing and what you want if you have been sick. I didn't see any meaningful programs that they are trying to pursue as far as reintegration is concerned. No, they aren't at all. I think the only reintegration and rehabilitation program that is so lively and reach out to quite a number of prisoners is the church. You know, the church is very vibrant at Harare Central Prison. Some of the once a week, they have 4 seats on every prisoner, and then every day is voluntary for those who want to go to chapel lunch hour, and of course over the weekends it's for everybody in the classrooms. So yeah, it's quite vibrant, and if there are any prisoners who have changed for the better, they've done so mostly through the church activities at the prison than any rehabilitation program. And there's none.
So take me through your day. You know, when your visitors are not coming, what would you do from 6 to 3 p.m.? What were you doing?
So what happens at prison is that they open, your day starts at 8 o'clock. So every morning I would wake up, then you have to be counted and reconciled. So counted, reconciled, perfect. Then I take up my weightlifting exercises. I was doing weightlifting in the morning. Then I would go up, and then I would do further kung fu exercises to keep myself fit. So you don't provoke me, please. Then after my kung fu exercises, then I would take a bath, then eat, right? Then of course home brought food. I mean, I never ate from what was prepared inside. So then I would eat my porridge, then tea, then I would go outside, then go to the ground, walk 5 to 10 kilometers. I found a way of measuring that, right? And then thereafter I would read. So I would go in the classrooms to read. I read a lot of books, nearly 50-60 books for the 8 months, thick books for the 8 months that I was in prison. I mean, I read a lot of books. So I would read, and then then of course I would get a visa in between. Then I was also a sponsor of one of the main teams at the prison, which is called a soccer team, which is called Tech Rovers. So I was one of the main sponsors of that team. So I mean, soccer pushed us a lot. We would support it, watch it if the team is playing, even watch other teams as well, and then go to visit, meet my visitors, then come back. Then by 2 o'clock, you know, they are feeding. By 3 o'clock, you are locked up. So you are locked up between 3 p.m. and 8 a.m., which is 17 hours. So yeah, so most of your time you are locked up. And then when you are locked up, I do a few more exercises, and then I read. So I would read. One thing that I did when I was in prison is I was reading. And of course I found a lot of time to pray, reflect. Then I would go to church lunch hour. Every lunch hour daily, I would go to the lunch hour service in the chapel. And that really kept me going. It kept me so busy. The day, the 7 hours we were out would be so packed with activity that in no moment it will be gone. The day is gone.
So let's go to the 17 hours that you spent, locked inside. What is the conversation within the cell, among the inmates? What is it that they'll be talking about before one fall asleep?
I mean, you talk everything.
Yeah.
You know, in the prison, you talk everything from family to politics. I mean, people discuss a lot about politics, their hopes and aspirations. You know, people share their stories, what brings them inside prison.
Yes.
I got to learn a lot about why these youngsters are in prison. Mostly the youngsters, they were younger than I. You know, what brings them in, their experiences at the hands of the police. They would share amazing stories of how they were ill-treated by the police during investigations, especially those who were involved in robberies, armed robberies, and so on. I mean, they would share harrowing incidents of how the police would beat people up, shoot them dead, even in their cells, and then say they were shot trying to run away. I mean, I heard horrible stories, and of course of also how crime is committed. You know, it was interesting because you know these men would even share and narrate how they commit crime.
Okay.
Yeah, so you really got to understand what's happening in their lives and in their cycle and so on. So yeah, it will be a lot of conversations, a lot of it, you know, wide ranging, and of course I would listen to some of it, then but in between and mostly I would take up the time to read, because reading was a way to educate myself, to acquire and gain knowledge, and also to find a way to kill time more profitably. It was very important for me to read. So then I would be reading in between, and then you hardly fall asleep. There's a lot of lies. Mujere muneinda, my brother. Muneinda dzinoruma zvokuti ukaenda unogona kudzoka wasviba nekurumwa nenda.
So according to the discussion, what was the common crime, you know, and what were the reasons why they committed such?
People, they commit different crimes. I mean, the common crimes would be unlawful entry, you know, whereby people are just breaking into people's homes, and of course they would be saying, you know, we have no way to get jobs, we have no money, we want to live, so we want to share the resources that others have whilst we don't have. I mean, people could just say a lot of things. Others would say, I mean, I was born like that and what have you. Yeah, so I mean, those are some of the things that you would really then get to pick and understand. Yeah, but I've tried to speak to most of the ones that I interacted with, even those who would share such stories. I got a lot of time to speak to them and tell them that crime is wrong, is not the right thing to do in your life. I mean, I really went at length and at pains to share with them that they need to work hard and do the right things.
So obviously when you're inside legally, your legal team was, you know, running around, making the appeal, you know, the paperwork and everything. Let's come to the day that, you know, the High Court judge said, no, Jacob is a free man. He did not commit any crime. How did you feel?
I mean, of course, when you can't be grateful to an oppressor for setting you free, that can't happen. I mean, you can't say, oh, thank you so much, I appreciate. No. In the first place, I should never have been arrested, I should never have been tried, and I should never have been convicted. So rather, I felt the pain of saying, okay, so now after 3 years they've been holding my passport. I still don't have my passport right now. I still have to go to get my passport. Actually, it's one of my tasks that I still have to do. You know, they held my passport for so long, and I've been reporting to the police since 2020. You know, I was not able to go out of this country to sort my companies outside the country and do my business. No, I've not been able to do business outside Zimbabwe. All my bank accounts, you know, they some were suspended, and you know, because I couldn't travel, I couldn't live, I couldn't renew my bank cards, I couldn't do nothing. You know, and to imagine that you do that to me for 3 years. Holding my passport. I applied several times, countless times, to get a temporary reprieve, to get back my passport and go to business, to work, and then come back. They refused for 3 years. And then they went further, try me in a bogus court, convict me for 8 months, for 4 years. Then after serving 8 months of the 4 years, then you come back and say, you are a free man, you never committed the crime, you can go in peace. I mean, sometimes it frustrates. I mean, it makes you angry to say, I mean, how dare you say that? You know, but of course, the important thing is you are overwhelmed with excitement and joy and the prospect of meeting your family, reuniting and reintegrating. So you say, okay, fine, it doesn't matter. I mean, as long as I get my freedom. So it's such a relief. It's a huge relief to say, at least I'm out. And for your own information, I actually never believed I was going to go out before Christmas. Why? Because just a few days before that, you know, the court was being postponed countless times. And it was clear that, you know, there is something they are cooking up every time, so that I don't either get to be heard this year but next year. And then on top of that, then I was told there was a tweet from George Charamba where he was saying, Ngaruvhume is not going to be out before Christmas. Those who have been cheering him on, they will enjoy their Christmas with their families without him because he will still be behind bars. It looks as if he knew exactly what was going to happen. So when I was told that, I said, maybe I'm not going to go out after all. So I didn't actually believe I was going out. But when the arguments were going on in the court, I realized that, whoops, it looks as if after all I'm going to go out. So it was quite a surprise to me actually that I got the acquittal verdict or the upholding of the appeal by the justices who heard my case.
When you left, I understand the day that you were supposed to walk out, there was some delay. And then a day after or a day after, that's when you walked free. Was it deliberate? Was it legal? Is it a procedure or what?
It is. I mean, it's part of the system. Once they get you, they don't want to release you easily. They don't want to let you go. Not at all. So there was huge effort to keep me in prison even after the acquittal. And then I did 2 more days still in prison, sleeping there under the same conditions whilst I'd been acquitted by the High Court. So it's part of what they do. It's part of the job. It's part of the job to frustrate you. So their aim is to frustrate you. And they go at length. They go at length to make sure that you are frustrated, but of course they never succeed. They never succeed. I was saying to fellow inmates, I've been here for 8 months. What would 2, 3, 4 more days make that would make me lose myself, having waited for so many months? Because I knew all this time that I committed no crime, and I knew that they knew I didn't commit any crime. So what is waiting for another 2, 3 days before I'm finally released? I can wait.
Without mentioning names of other inmates that are still in there, did you meet one who confided in you and said, I'm here but I didn't commit this crime? Whether criminal, political, or what, but they would come and say, Jacob, I just didn't, commit, but because probably they lacked legal representation, they ended up being convicted.
One thing I got to do when I was in prison is I listened to many stories of different people. Many stories, I tell you. And I think what was most disturbing are the rape cases. The rape cases were quite horrible because, it looks as it sounded as if, and it looked as if someone would want just to send somebody to prison so easily and cheaply. They can simply report that they've been raped, and it didn't look quite good. It doesn't at all, because most of them actually confess they never committed the crimes, which is very unfortunate. I mean, it's something that was quite gullible, and it looks as if there are shortfalls in our criminal justice system. I would typically tell you one story that amazed me. This guy is serving for it's a drug offense. I met him earlier on when I just went to Harare Central Prison. So this guy says, you know what, I was very unfortunate because he picked a passenger from Macheke who was coming to Harare. Okay. An elderly passenger. And then, so they were not just the 2 of them in that car. He had a small bag, and then they put it in the boot, and then they traveled. When they got to Mavuku turnoff, they were flagged down by the police. Then the police said, okay, we have identified your car randomly for a thorough search. So we're going to search the car. Do you carry anything dangerous in the car? The young man says, no, we have nothing dangerous here. Says, fine. And then, okay, so we'll start with do you have any bags or luggage? Then they ask this other elderly man, do you have any bags or luggage with you in this car? He says, no, I don't have. And then the guy says, Aywa, but you have. You just put your bag in the boat. He says, no, I don't have. Says, what is it? Then the elderly man says, oh, what are you saying, my son? Are you, I'm only going to visit my son who is sick. I am just hoping that I don't get him dead, because what you are saying is so strange. And then the police say, okay, fine, let's search the bags. Takes out that bag and they find Mbanje, Daha in it. And then the man says, no, I don't, it's not mine. I just boarded this car and that's all. And what the police do is, without investigating, without taking him for questioning, they allow him to actually pick his next combi to go. And then they charge this guy, convicted for 3 years. So we joined the prison at the same time, and then he's serving, he got 1 year, set aside, and then you get then 1/3 remission at prison, so he's serving a year plus. So, but still, investigations are part of that whole process, where you can expose and know the truth from evidence does speak. They could have checked records of the man, they would have interviewed him, checked his background, maybe he was involved in drugs before or something. I mean, they could have done a lot, but they let him go. So such glaring loopholes, and then of course without any evidence linking him to the bag, he got convicted at the magistrates and is serving. I mean, it's amazing.
Now that Jacob Ngaruvhume is out, where to?
We are ready to keep fighting with double energy.
Okay.
Yeah. So if we were fighting at 60%, it's going to be at 120% now.
Okay.
Because we realize that the conditions are still the same, if not worse. The country has continued to deteriorate. People continue to suffer. And so we can't go back on our commitment to stand up for the people of Zimbabwe. Our fight against corruption is very much alive, and we are still committed to it, and we are prepared to go all the way to the wire. So we are prepared to go on, and this is what we are doing already.
So as Zimbabweans, as we conclude, are we safe when one, giving you an example, is just convicted by a mere post from probably a ghost account? Because as I am sitting here, I can just create another account, Jacob Ngaruvhume.
Exactly.
And start doing, what they could end up saying is a criminal offense. In your own opinion, your experience, do you think we are safe? What is it that we should do now?
You see, whilst I may say yes, we are not safe, but the point really is, this is what the regime wants. In sentencing me to 4 years for creating a poster and allegedly posting it on my Twitter account, which, number one, in any case, I am not able to. Posters is the least thing that I'm able to do, because I've never done that. But then they allege that I sat down as a political party leader. I sat down and designed a poster and then uploaded it onto my account. I mean, that is crazy. But the point really is, they want you that afraid and that insecure, and so that you don't challenge them. But I believe we are better off, more of us defying and more defying, because that defiance is what we need to change and transform our country. This Zimbabwe can only be delivered by citizens who are strong and who continue pushing for the truth until the truth sets us free. That is important. That is important. And my case will then show that they can send you to prison, they can do everything they can, but you can then also show that it doesn't change you, it doesn't make you a coward, it doesn't make you afraid to challenge them. And that is an important message you want to give, that we are prepared to go all the way for our beliefs, because this is what Zimbabwe needs. Otherwise we are a doomed country, and we can't allow ourselves to be a doomed country when we've got such a beautiful country with so much endowments in terms of minerals, in terms of knowledge, in terms of good people and everything. So we must stand up for what we believe in, and I'm sure we won't go wrong.
But are you sponsored by any government, by any individual, by any political party, by any organization, be it foreign or local, to fight against corruption.
We are not. If anything, you know, for whatever we do, we get contributions from Zimbabweans, fellow citizens who actually commit themselves. You know, you remember I was arrested cleaning up Lita Mbare, you know, I was arrested and they said, no, you shouldn't be doing that. You know, they took me to Matapi police station, you know, for cleaning.
Yeah.
And all that was done by Zimbabweans, you know, ordinary citizens, you know. And it's not expensive, after all, for your own information. It's not expensive. It's so cheap. But they don't do it because they don't want to see a better Zimbabwe. They want to see a dying Zimbabwe, and in that poverty and in that death, in that evil, that's where their opportunity is. And it's unfortunate. You can't survive on opportunities that come through the people's suffering. That is an acceptable kind of politics in this country.
Your last message or your last words to Zimbabweans today. I know you are a busy man, you want to write somewhere.
Sure.
What is the message which we can say it's a carry home to Zimbabweans as we end this program?
I want to say to Zimbabweans, Zimbabwe is our heritage. Zimbabwe is our country. Zimbabwe is all that we have, and the responsibility to make Zimbabwe right lies with us. It is up to us to shape and develop that kind of country we want. And we have no other country except this beautiful Zimbabwe. So I urge you young people, the elderly, people from different political persuasions, different political organizations, let's unite and come together to fight the scourge of corruption, the scourge of bad governance, the scourge of violence, and the scourge of manipulation and evil against the citizens. That we have witnessed with the ZANU-PF regime. That is unacceptable. So it is our responsibility to step forward and speak truth to power and build an alternative government and an alternative leadership that can serve Zimbabwe. I still believe it is possible. I still believe you and I can come together and make sense and speak sense to Zimbabwe. We can deliver this country with this kind of spirit. We can say, let us be prepared to give all that we can, and one day soon Zimbabwe will be a better place for you and for me and for our children. Thank you.
There you heard it from Jacob Ngaruvhume, president of Transform Zimbabwe. He has been in the prison for almost 8 months until the High Court said you are a free man. From what he has said, as a politician, he says we may be from different political affiliations, or you may differ on how to take Zimbabwe forward. But at the end of the day, it is about heritage. It is about Zimbabwe. It doesn't make politicians enemies. My name is Robert Tafumane. For now, bye-bye.